folks, welcome back. So today we're going to start talking about digging into some of these personality disorders, and we're going to start with the cluster A group of personality disorders. Now, if you remember, I said about the cluster A group that we tend to call these the odd and eccentric. You can't see that, but I will write it again for you. We tend to call that the odd and eccentric group. And what we mean by this is that some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about has, with some of the other clusters, has real effects on maybe how a person interacts, how a person feels about themselves, the type of quality of life that the person's going to have. And these things are true of the cluster A personality disorders as well. But what you're really going to find here is that these three personality types, or these three personality disorders, are just kind of strange in a way. Now, you also heard me say last time that even though we put these things in groups, they don't necessarily always kind of hang on the same idea. And so even though I've said that these are the odd and eccentric ones, and when we do kind of see that in all three, the paranoid personality disorder, which is where we're going to start here, the paranoid personality disorder is actually a little less odd and eccentric and is a little more paranoid. It's its own thing. So first I just want to tell you what it is, and then I'll read this definition for you. The paranoid personality disorder is a type of person who sees in other people nefariousness. What does nefariousness mean? Well, it just means that that person's out to get you. That person is trying to do something bad. The idea of nefarious usually means that it's kind of sneaky, right? They're not just being overtly aggressive. They're not just coming after you necessarily in public, but they may be doing things to undermine you, or they may be doing passive aggressive things, or they may be kind of poisoning the well, so to speak, without directly going after you, right? That's kind of what nefarious means, is there's some kind of negative, usually sort of a hidden undercurrent. And so folks with this personality disorder tend to read into almost everything that they see, that they hear from somebody else. They always tend to read into it that there's some nefarious or some negative or some malicious, which also just means negative, idea behind it, that they're not just doing things because, I don't know, it was an accident, or maybe they're actually even giving a compliment, or maybe they're just giving an opinion about something. The person with the paranoid personality, the hallmark of this disorder is that they tend to read into that. They tend to read into these comments, into these actions, and think that something really negative is going on here. One thing that you'll see that I will add into these playlists is some examples, as I mentioned last time. There are some of these disorders, I think, as you might imagine, that are relatively easy to find, that are relatively not difficult to see somebody online giving an example or sharing their own experience type of thing. Paranoid personality, as you might imagine, is not one of these. And so there are a couple examples that I tend to show in class, and you'll see this throughout too. But the ones that I'm probably going to use, unless I find something new, are actually actors, or as much as I can tell, they seem to be actors. So you'll see a person kind of giving you a flavor of what this personality disorder is like, but you're not necessarily going to get to see it on a real person. I always do every year, every semester, try to find somebody who's giving a real example, and I tend to come up short, but I will look again. Otherwise, you may just be seeing somebody who's trying to demonstrate what that would be like. So let's look here at the diagnostic criteria for the paranoid personality disorder, and what you'll probably see. I can't tell where the camera is today. I think I maybe have it too zoomed in, so Maybe you hadn't seen that yet, but there it is. So the paranoid personality disorder is on page 249. And again, what you're going to see is that primarily what we're looking at is somebody who's just mistrustful, somebody who thinks people are out to get them. The other thing that you will see about personality disorders in general, and this is really probably true of mental disorders in general in the DSM, is that first symptom, that first criteria is going to be the thing that really stands out in terms of who this personality is, what it's like. That's going to be the one that tends to hold the most weight. The reason this happens, by the way, to go on a quick tangent, is the DSM is compiled statistically. So they go out and they ask clinicians, hey, do you have anybody you've diagnosed with paranoid personality disorder? And they say, can you give us a list of their symptoms, right? And then the kind of preponderance of the symptom, that is to say, the symptom that shows up the most across all of those cases tends to get listed first, is how I believe they put the DSM together. So it's not a mistake, or it's not just their idea of what would be the most prominent personality feature, or the most prominent symptom or criteria. It really tends to be the preponderance of the data that suggests that this is the thing that if you're going to get a diagnosis, in this case, of paranoid personality, this is the thing that's probably going to be the most likely symptom that the person is going to experience. So first you'll get a description, a little brief description, of course, just like all the others, and then you'll start to see, X or more of the following. So this is on page 649 again, and it says, a pervasive distrust and suspiciousness of others such that their motives are interpreted as malevolent. Malevolent, again, just means mean or evil in some cases. So such that their motives are interpreted as malevolent. Pervasive distrust and suspiciousness of others such that their motives are interpreted as malevolent, beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts as indicated by 4 or more of the following. So you need 4 of these. You'll see that this number changes from disorder to disorder. You'll need some cases more, in some cases less, though 4 is actually a pretty low number. You will always tend to see beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, because beginning by early adulthood, remember, has an onset in early adulthood or late adolescence. Remember, that's just what it takes to be a personality disorder in general, and needs to be pervasive and inflexible, which is why they're saying present in a variety of contexts, right? That it's showing up in a lot of different places. So that's that broad description, and then here we have the criteria. Number 1, suspects without sufficient basis that others are exploiting, harming, or deceiving him or her. So suspects without sufficient basis that others are out to exploit or harm the person. So again, this is kind of the first criteria, so this is going to be the one that we are going to expect to see the most often. And so here's a person that you have suspecting, right, that no reason is necessarily given, but I just suspect that you're out to do something negative to me. I suspect that you're trying to harm me or do something mean to me without sufficient basis, just because I think that way. Number 2, is preoccupied with unjustified doubts about the loyalty or trustworthiness of friends or associates. So this person is kind of constantly questioning their relationships, even when they're in a relatively good relationship and things seem to be fine. They're almost always going to question the validity. They're almost always going to question whether this person is really just playing some con game on me, or maybe they've changed and now they're going to play some con game on me. And so even in a relationship where the other person might feel like, hey, things are pretty good, we've known each other for a while, I really trust this person, the person with the paranoid personality is likely going to experience that, is likely going to feel like maybe that person, or at least have the suspicion that maybe that person is really acting in some nefarious, some malevolent way. I say that the other person probably, maybe kind of say things are good. Usually with a paranoid personality, this isn't something they're holding inside. This isn't something that they're saying, oh, I have this feeling and I just don't want to tell anybody. This is something that they're probably going to call you out about, or at least if they don't call you out about it directly or ask you about it directly, they will tend to at least kind of give you the cold shoulder back, or start being passive aggressive in the way that they think you're being passive aggressive or malevolent. So this isn't the type of thing where the other person would entirely not know about it. Generally, if the person's got a paranoid personality, they're going to say, why did you do that? Where were you? Who was that person, right? They're always going to be assuming the worst, and they're going to act in that way too. It's not this kind of quiet concern or this kind of quiet worry that somebody's trying to hurt me. It's really more of a, hey, what are you doing over there? Why are you looking at me? Number 3, is reluctant to confide in others because of unwarranted fear that the information will be used maliciously against him or her. So these people, again, just aren't really trustful. And so in particular here, they're talking about this idea that they're not going to be, likely to confide. They're not going to find many confidants. They're not going to feel safe. They're not going to feel like they can trust other people really easily. And so what that's going to mean is they're not going to confide in them. They're not going to tell them things that are bothering them. They're not going to tell them maybe secrets that they have or crushes that they have or whatever it is. They're always going to feel like, hey, if I tell somebody this, they're going to use this against me. Or if I tell somebody this, this is going to get me in trouble, or they're just going to laugh at me anyway, right? So they're always going to have this sort of difficulty opening up. I won't say too much just because of where this is going, but I do think I had a client like this once, and what this looked like for this person was that they really had a hard time just getting into the therapeutic process. So where I was working at the time, the person would come in and they would take kind of a little test just to give us a sense, to give me a sense of what they were, struggling with, and how we could be helpful to them. And at the time I was a trainee, that is to say I had a supervisor, a psychologist who was over me, and so they would review my tape, so that means we were recording our sessions and this type of thing. And so this person was having a really, really hard time getting past all of the things that they were having to sign, all of the things that they were having to agree to, all of the little tests and assessments they were going to have to take just to get in the door to see a therapist for the first time. And by the time they got to see me and I handed them one more piece of paper, which was just a consent form, I think at the time, and I do think the video recording agreement, that person just was not having it. They told me, definitely, you can't record, and I'll think about signing the consent form. Is how I think it went. So this person, and I didn't think of it this way at the time, I was really kind of just caught up in, well, what's going on? Like most people come in and say, yeah, here, let me sign this so we can get started. But this person, this was a piece of the process. This kind of like, I don't know about this. Where's this going? Who's going to see this? Why do I have to sign it again when I just saw something like this downstairs, right? And so they were having a lot of this kind of mistrust just about the process. And if you remember last week or last time when I talked about sort of the reasoning for putting personality disorders together in the first place, one of the most primary reasons was to think about how that's going to affect the therapeutic relationship. And here I am telling you that, yeah, it absolutely was affecting the relationship. That person wasn't coming in about having a paranoid personality. That person was coming in for some other stuff going on in their life. But we couldn't get to that until we could get past this sense of, I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I can trust this, organization. I don't know if I can trust these pieces of paper. And so we worked through that long before we got to anything about this person's presenting concerns, is what we would call them. All right. Number 4, reads hidden, demeaning, or threatening meanings into benign remarks or comments. So this is, and again, with a lot of personality disorders, you can think of times when you've done something like is, right? And I warned you to be careful that you don't start diagnosing yourself, because these are really just personality traits. Sometimes there are ways to handle stress. Sometimes we engage in some of these when we're in a certain environment or when we're in a certain mental state. But again, the personality disorder is about pervasive, inflexible, been there since you were a young man or woman. So this reading hidden, demeaning, or threatening meanings, right? You can imagine someone saying, oh, I really like your shoes today, and the person saying, whoa, what did you think of my shoes yesterday? What do you mean, right? That's that kind of paranoid reading into nothing was meant by it, and yet you can understand how a person might take that and twist it a little bit and find some offense or find some reason that it was actually an attack rather than, in this case, a compliment or certainly just an average comment, right? Hey, it's a nice day. What do you mean it's a nice day? It's kind of a hyperbole, but is probably isn't too far off from the truth of how these folks think, how their mind kind of reads things. Number 5, persistently bears grudges. So this person is going to be, they say here, unforgiving of insults, injuries, or slights. So when these things pan out, when maybe somebody is saying something mean to them, or maybe somebody is trying to be aggressive or get one over on them or whatever it is, these folks are going to remember and hold on to that. They're not going to forget that you did that thing that one time. And yeah, you're being a little bit nice now, but I remember 8 years ago when you told me you were going to pick me up from the store and you left me there for 2 hours, right? I remember that. You don't really like me, right? And so it's this type of idea, this type of thought pattern where they're almost always looking for the reason that somebody doesn't like them or that somebody's trying to hurt them in some kind of way. Number 6, perceives attacks on his or her character or reputation that are not apparent to others and is quick to react angrily or to counterattack. So this is an important just kind of feature of this disorder, I think, and I have mentioned it already, but it's that these aren't kind of like weak, if you want, folks who are just feeling bad about themselves and everybody hates me and everybody's trying to, get one over on me, right? This isn't how they're conceptualizing that. It's really more of a I will show them attitude is how it tends to come across. It's really more of a defending oneself attitude than it is a woe is me, this people just don't like me, right? It's not, it's not exactly this anyway, but it's not kind of close to that social anxiety that you might experience or that you might remember reading about, where the person is anxious and doesn't want to go there because really they're sort of afraid of how people are going to evaluate them. No, the paranoid personality is generally going to do what they need to do, but they are going to assume that people are out to get them, and so they want to fight back, all right? They kind of see their own, if you want, kind of meanness, assertiveness, aggressiveness, whatever kind of means they're bringing to bear. They see that as a fighting back against the people who are trying to push them down. And so here's the difference, right? When you see this kind of paranoid personality, it for lack of a better word, it tends to look a little mean. You'll see this even in the examples that I did find, but it tends to look a little mean. It tends to look a little angry rather than afraid or worried, as it could read, right? If you haven't actually experienced it, you could read as this is a fearful person who doesn't want to come out of the house because everybody's trying to hurt them. No, they're coming out of the house and they're going to tell you, why they're not going to stand for your stuff. Number 7, has recurrent suspicions without justification regarding the fidelity. Fidelity means trustworthiness, faithfulness, literally. Regarding the fidelity of a spouse or sexual partner. So this gets its own criteria. That's how much it probably comes up for individuals. That, of course, they can be distrustful about a lot of things, but in particular, you can imagine being in a romantic relationship, that that this would be a hot button issue, right? That you see your partner, wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend talking to somebody else, and you're just thinking, if you're in that vein of thinking of they're always trying to hurt me, they're always out to get me, right? Are they plotting a way to cheat when I'm out of the city this weekend? Or are they making fun of me? Is she telling him all of the stupid things I do before I go to bed? Is she telling them how I'm on this stupid diet or whatever it is, right? That this person is just going to be really worried. And in particular, the thing that's likely going to come up is, are they cheating on me? Is she over there cheating on me? I see that you keep looking at Chris Hemsworth on the television screen, and that guy at your office looks 35% like him. So what's going on there, right? They're going to sort of find things to kind of put together and be really suspicious. Now, one of the reasons that it is put in this category is really because cluster A was sort of thought of, and maybe this makes sense too, was sort of thought of as like a light schizophrenia, was kind of thought of as this is a kind of a precursor, if not a reduction in, but sort of a diminished or a less extreme type of psychosis. We don't really think that anymore. I certainly don't think that. But what they're talking about is this idea, and we will get to psychosis at some point in this class, but when we get there, you'll see that there's something called a delusion, which is different than a hallucination. And a delusion just means that you have an idea that is unfounded, right? Aliens are coming to get me is a delusion, versus I see aliens out the window. Do you guys see those aliens, right? That's a hallucination. And so what you tend to see, one of the things that they're sort of pointing to, is that the paranoid personality has these almost mild delusions. They're not completely delusional because they're not coming out of nowhere. They're what we call ideas of reference in a way. And you'll see this specifically with the schizotypal personality. But this delusion, this kind of reference, means that they're getting it from somewhere. There is a reference point. It's not coming out of the sky. There is a reference to what their delusion is. I did see my girlfriend talking to that guy for 5 minutes after work before she came to the car. I did see that, right? And so it's not totally made up, but now what I'm doing with that, right, where I'm going with it, what I'm thinking it must mean, right, those can border on delusional. You have no proof that she's into that guy, that she's attracted to that guy, that she's cheating, whatever it is, right? You have no proof of that. You're just almost being delusional based on this one thing that you saw that gave you no clue or gave you no sense or information that that was the thing you should think was going on there, right? They also had clipboards in their hand and looked really stressed. And, she gave him a high five when she left, right? Just a bunch of signs that that's not maybe a romantic conversation, a romantic interaction. But still, I kind of come away with it with this sense of I know what's going on. And it borders on delusion. So that's kind of why these are grouped together, right? This is clear. I mean, even if you don't know what these are yet, probably, but the idea that schizo and schizo may be related to schizophrenia, you're not wrong about that. And you've probably heard of paranoid schizophrenia. It's not something we really diagnose anymore in that way, but that is another reason that these three are grouped together, and it kind of ties into this idea of delusion, this idea of kind of seeing something that's not quite there, and how that could be related to psychosis, where you're fully capable of thinking, seeing, imagining something that's not there. Okay, so you're going to see either before or after this video, just depending on how I put them into the playlist, there should be some examples of paranoid personality. Again, these will probably mostly just be actors, but I think I may be able to find a couple. I think I remember actually finding one last year as I think about it, where there's a guy who's actually seems to be a real person. So just take a look at those. I do encourage you to do that. That is usually what we do in class. I talk about it, we watch the video, and then we have a discussion on the other side and kind of think about how what we read matches up with what we're seeing in these videos. So I want you to be doing that. That is how I would be preparing you for the next test that's coming up, in particular the final. And so I want you to make sure that as you're watching those, you're not just kind of sitting back and watching them, but you're thinking, okay, this is the things, these are the criteria that we're talking about. How am I noticing this? How is this coming across? How is this showing up in real life? Because the point of these video examples is to get you to see that sometimes it looks different, it feels different, sounds different than what it does on the page, right? The page, you could read this paranoid person as being a really shy, timid person, but I think when you see how they are, you'll see that they've got a lot of fight in them, actually. Okay, so let's talk about the schizoid personality disorder. This one's really different. It's going to take a bit of a turn. The schizoid personality disorder, the long and short of it is these are people who don't like relationships. These are people who don't really prefer other people. Now, this isn't just introverted or shy or picky or, you've got your friend group and that's all you need, right? These are folks who could really take or leave any relationship. You're going to see when I give you the criteria here that really includes a family. They could almost take or leave their own family that they grew up. They could take or leave having friends. They could take or leave having relationships. And in fact, if they had to gauge it, it's probably more annoying. It's probably more frustrating to be in any type of relationship, in any type, friendship, romantic, family. It's probably more frustrating to be in any type of relationship than to not be, right? They kind of don't care either way, like that's what they would tell you, but they would rather be alone. They would rather be by themselves. And this is gonna, vary, right? Some folks would say, absolutely no people, I can't stand having any interaction. Some folks would say, I don't really like it, but it's fine, I'll go, right? And so somewhere in between these two is what we're talking about when we talk about this idea of a schizoid personality disorder. So I'll just read the criteria here. There are some pretty good examples that I will be able to share with you online. One guy in particular, you'll recognize him. He's bald, and most of his videos are in black and white. It seems to be real and really sort of surprises me even. This is somebody that I haven't worked with, or this is a personality type I haven't, to my knowledge, had any experience with. And so it's really sort of surprising me when you hear that they don't want relationships and they're this kind of cold person, that, there's a bit, you still see character on them. It's not like this is somebody that you would picked out as that's definitely a loner. So anyway, pay attention to those. I should probably read these before talking more deeply about it. So this is on page 652, the diagnostic criteria for the schizoid personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of detachment from social relationships in a restricted range of expression of emotions in interpersonal settings, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 4 or more of the following. There are 7. Number 1, neither desires nor enjoys close relationships, including being part of a family. So here again is that hallmark, and I've already sort of just said this, but neither desires nor enjoys, right? And so they're not saying hates, right? But you can kind of see that it's right there of maybe dislikes or does not prefer, right? So neither desires nor enjoys close relationships, including being part of a family. Number 2, almost always chooses solitary activity. So just in terms of the things that they want to do, just in terms of the things that they choose to do with their time, they're often gonna, if left up to their own devices, just choose to do something that's by themselves. That might be learning to play an instrument, that might be playing a video game, watching a movie, eating a meal by yourself, right? All of these things that you might think, hey, for one, you could do it with somebody else, and why wouldn't this person sometimes do it with somebody else? But also, these are things that you can certainly do by yourself, and that is usually what's drawing the schizoid personality to it is, hey, this is something I don't have to find somebody else to play tennis or basketball with. I can just play guitar or lift weights in my garage, and I don't have to be bothered with anybody. And so they kind of think that way, right? They sort of think about, I don't really want to put up with folks. And again, as far as personality disorders go, right, you can probably think of a time when you were like, no, I just want to be by myself. I don't want to see anybody. You know, maybe you have kids and you love those kids, or you have a partner, husband, a best friend, whatever. You love them so much, and yet, please don't talk to me right now. Please leave me alone, right? And so you can understand how that somebody might kind of live in that space constantly. Somebody might live in that pervasive and inflexible space of almost always wanting to be alone, wanting to not be bothered with people. And yes, even in those moments you could do it if you had to, but as soon as I get a chance, I really just want to be done with people for the day, right? And so you can kind of see how that might feel a little bit. Number 3, has little, if any, interest in having sexual experiences with another person. I haven't seen any studies, but I have had students ask that connect schizoid personality to asexuality, which is kind of a lack of sexual interest, and depending on how you split the term, maybe a lack of romantic interest in other folks too. But that'd be something I'd be really interested to see, because that seems to be what they're alluding to here, is that folks with schizoid personality tend to not be interested in romantic relationships, or sexual is what they're saying specifically here. They tend to not be interested in having sexual relationships. Now, I'm sure that that's not 100%. I'm sure that there is some variability within that. One of the things I will note is one of the examples, the guy I'm talking about in these videos, he, at least at one point, was dating someone. So again, it's not 100%, like I totally wouldn't be in a relationship where I totally would, and this might be a criteria that he doesn't meet, right? You only need 4, remember, there's 7 of these, so it might be that he's got all the others, or a person has all the others, and yet this one shows up. So again, don't think of it as cut and dry, don't think of it as, you know, everybody's gonna be the same in this way, but we will expect a tendency that they won't really want to be sexual, they won't really want to be romantic, and maybe sometimes they do it for pressure reasons, or maybe sometimes they do it because maybe there's a part of them that still seeks some of that out. Number 5, lacks close friends or confidants other than first-degree relatives. So you would probably notice about a person like this that they don't have a lot of close friends, they don't have a lot of maybe even like close cousins or, you know, extended family members that they connect with, or, you know, per the previous criteria, they certainly aren't necessarily going to have had a lot of relationships to confide and to connect with people in this way. And so what you see here as well is that even in their social relationships, they're not going to have a lot of folks that they're connecting with. They say, except for, you know, first-degree relatives, which means your immediate family. But you do, of course, see in that first criteria that they kind of prefer not to be in those relationships either. So maybe the familiarity kind of wears in a bit, and they feel a little bit more trust gaining here, even if they didn't mean to. But generally, they're not going to seek out other relationships to confide in, to make connection in the way that other people might. Number 6, appears indifferent to the praise and criticism of others. You know, so if you're trying to get a tone for this person, the way I was trying to give you a tone for the paranoid personality, they are a bit like stoic. They are a bit, you know, shrug their shoulders at things. This isn't the type of thing where they're freaking out because they have to go, you know, hang out with their little cousin or whatever. This isn't the type of thing where, you know, somebody approaches them and wants to go on a date and they are like, oh, I hate people, you know. It's not usually gonna look like that. It's really more of a sort of an indifferent, like, maybe, you don't want to go on a date with me? I don't know, I guess. Right? It's a little bit more sort of indifferent to that. Now, the people who kind of have a real sense of like definitely not, right, who are closer to that edge of not indifferent, but really don't prefer being around people, they're probably going to respond to that in such a way that's maybe direct and indifferent to the other person's feelings. No, I don't date people, right? What do you mean you don't date people, right? That's going to be frustrating, and then that kind of continued line of questioning. But they're really going to sort of be indifferent to that, right? Even if the person storms off and says, I didn't really want to date you, you're an idiot, you're ugly anyway, I hope you know, blah, blah, blah. That person's not going to really feel much about that. Okay, well, glad I got out of the date is probably going to be one of the most primary things that they're thinking about that experience, is just being able to escape this interaction that they didn't want to have. That kind of emotional retort at them isn't really, if they meet this criteria, going to affect them much. They're not really going to kind of feel that in such a way. Number 7 shows emotional coldness, detachment, and flattened affectivity. Affectivity, if we haven't talked about this, always just means like emotional expression, sort of how you express your emotions. So flattened affectivity really just means that this is a person who has sort of no real emotional expression. So kind of what I was saying before, right? They're going to have this kind of indifferent quality to them. They're not going to respond to praise, or not going to respond to criticism. You tell them they're an idiot, the worst person in the world, that's going to hit them in the same way. If you say, oh my God, I can't believe that you're here, you're the most amazing person I've ever seen in my life, right? Okay, you know, they're going to have that same reaction to it's not really important to them. It doesn't really mean anything for them. So again, this kind of really sort of muted personality who isn't really interested in relationships, who is kind of cold and indifferent to things, who isn't interested in romantic relationships. And so you really just get this kind of solitary type of, almost like a hermit person who really just kind of wants to be off by themselves and is fine with that. There's not a lot of distress happening, as far as I can tell, with somebody who's got a schizoid personality. Now, the distress would come from having to go against your own nature. That is to say, I can probably stand to be around people about 2 hours a week, but I gotta be at work 40 hours a week, right? Kind of, that's the type of thing that would be distressing. It's not this sort of internal distress, the way that you would look at the paranoid person and go, they're doing that in their head, that's distressing. We're worried about this person, worried about this person. That's gotta kind of cause them some type of anxiety, or, you know, anxiousness, or anger is what I was trying to say. That's not what you would expect to see with a schizoid person, except when they're confronted with the fact that maybe I have to come out of my shell, maybe I have to come out of my comfort zone. That's when that distress might show up. But otherwise, kind of in their own space, in their own head. And really, this is sort of true of most of the personality disorders. They're fine. Like I'm fine with the way that I am. Most personality disorders really symptomatic, if you remember. So last one, just to try to wrap up this cluster A group, is the schizotypal personality, and I really find this one sort of fascinating. I don't mean to laugh, but it's just interesting to me. When we talk about cluster A being the odd and eccentric group, we're really talking about schizotypal personality. Like, you could kind of call paranoid odd and eccentric. Sure, you could call schizoid odd and maybe eccentric more odd. But when we're really talking about, oh, that's just kind of a weird person, schizotypal is it. I don't say that to be pejorative. I say that because I think it's the best description of what's going on. These people just stand out. These people think differently, they act differently, they talk differently. than most other people. And that's what can kind of make it a disorder, is that often other folks will have a hard time connecting with how this person observes and interacts with their own reality. Now, again, we're sort of thinking about that connection perhaps to psychosis. This isn't psychosis at all, but it is similar again to that idea of you can think things that are related to real things, but that take you in a whole different place than what the actual thing was doing. Again, this is known as an idea of reference. This is known as an idea of reference, right? You have this reference point and you take it and you make this whole idea out of it that almost approaches a delusion. It almost approaches, how did you get that from what's actually happening around you? So you're going to see that the schizotypal folks are going to do this often. It's usually benign. It's not like the paranoid where they're thinking, oh my gosh, this person's trying to hurt me, this person's trying to do something mean, I better defend myself. It's usually just kind of benign, and again, just strange is why I keep coming back to it. So it might be like if we were in normal times, you're sitting in class and somebody drops their pen on the floor and you pick that pen up and you hand it back to them and you say, I knew we were gonna get married as soon as you dropped that pen. It's like, why did you think that, you know? And they'd say, well, you know, I had to get down on one knee, and I think you just did it to get my attention. And, you know, being down on one knee usually means that you're going to propose to someone. So if I'm down there, it must mean we're going to get married. Like, it's fate, right? Like, that's kind of that idea of reference. That kind of that sense of, yes, I did drop my pen, and maybe even I dropped it to get your attention. But it doesn't mean we're going to get married because you're down on one knee. Like, that isn't follow from me, right? That doesn't necessarily make any sense. But again, that's that idea of reference, right? Something is going on and it means all of these other things. You'll see in some of these examples that I'm going to show you, for instance, there are quite a few schizotypal examples, some real kind of lovable folks, if I'm being honest. But there's one guy who talks about he was outside and there was a thunderstorm, like, you know, stirring in the clouds, and he said that this was a message to him from God that everything was going to be okay. Now that's, you know, some of that's kind of religious stuff, and that's kind of normative in our society. But what is a little strange, and he gives a lot of these examples, but what is a little strange is that the thunderstorm meant good news, right? We don't usually associate thunderstorms with good news. So if he just said, oh, it was a beautiful day and I knew I was going to have a good day, or if he said it was raining and I knew this was not going to be a good one, right? But he sort of had this own idea of what that thunderstorm meant. And what you'll find with these folks is that they tend to have a very personal kind of idea of reference, right? It really is revolving around their own sense of how things are connected, their own sense of reality and how those things unfold that isn't necessarily related. And this is why they seem strange to us, is not necessarily related to how the community or the culture or the group says, well, thunderstorms, you know, if they mean anything, they mean bad news. They mean, you know, it's going to be a terrible day, or there's, you know, something awful coming on the horizon, right? We don't tend to think of it in this other way, but they have their own idea of what that means. And because that we don't agree on that, that makes it look a little strange to us. So again, that's why I keep coming back to this sort of odd and eccentric. Okay, this is on page 655. Schizotypal personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of social and interpersonal deficits marked by acute discomfort with and reduced capacity for close relationships, as well as by cognitive or perceptual distortions and eccentricities of behavior beginning by early adulthood, present in a variety of contexts, is indicated by 5 or more of the following. There's 8. There are 9. So I want to say that the first thing that they say here, this isn't the first thing in the criteria list, but the first thing that they mention, it may be the first thing in the criteria list, but the first thing they mention in that little descriptive paragraph is that they are not interested or that they kind of have a lowered interest in social relationships. I I don't think that that's exactly true. I have had a client who was diagnosed with this disorder, so I have a little bit of experience with it. My sense is that it's not that they don't desire social relationships. It's really more that they've gotten used to. It's hard for them to get connected to people. It's hard for people to understand their way of thinking. It's hard for people to accept, to not make fun of. Right? You can imagine being a child who's kind of odd in this way, and you'll see what I mean when you see some of these videos. But you can imagine being a child who's odd in this way and kind of just realizes, okay, well maybe I'm just not going to have that many friends. And it's not that I'm not seeking them out, it's just that I've sort of accepted that it's hard for me to connect with people. And so I'll be the kid who's a loner who keeps to myself. And if down the road somebody comes by it kind of gets me, then maybe we'll be friends then. So it's not this thing, I don't think, what I'm trying to say is I don't think it is kind of an inherent character of the personality that they don't want relationships the way it is for the schizoid. I think it's kind of a byproduct of the fact that they tend to be a little bit odd. And because of that, they eventually kind of accept that it's going to be difficult for me to find connections in this way. And then maybe a piece of wanting it a little less, honestly, a very small piece. But in my experience, it isn't that they don't want them, it's more so that it's hard for them to make them, and they kind of just go with that. So, number one is don't want social relationships. It is what we've been talking about. Ideas of reference, excluding delusions of reference. So, ideas of reference is what we're talking about. There's a basis. You could think that, I guess. You could make that up. It's not 100% out of the realm of possibility. We might get married. That can mean whatever you want it to mean to you. So we don't usually think of it that way, but sure. So that's ideas of reference, right? It doesn't go off the rails. Delusion of reference, it goes off the rails. You see a chalk circle, painted on the road, and you say, aliens have definitely been here. They're definitely coming back tomorrow. So everybody get ready, right? That's more of a delusion of reference. You're really off the rails here. There's no real indication that aliens have ever existed or visited, or that this could mean this thing in this very specific thing in particular. And so there we're kind of closer to a delusion of reference where, I don't know, I think maybe we're going to get married because you dropped your pen. I know what you mean, right? That's more of an idea of reference. You're going a little far, but it's not off the rails. All right, number two, odd beliefs or magical thinking that influences behavior and is inconsistent with subcultural norms. It says, for instance, superstitiousness, belief in clairvoyance, belief in telepathy, belief in a sixth sense. In children, this might be bizarre fantasies or preoccupations. Now, of course, this is not going to be enough to diagnose someone, but it is something that we might look for, that these folks might tend to have these type of superstitious or mystical beliefs that are a little bit out of line with the type of superstitious and mythical beliefs that we allow in this culture, right? Or that are more sanctioned in this culture. So we would just look for here, right? Is this just another piece of that puzzle? We're not going to have somebody come in and say, I believe in horoscopes and today means this and this for me, right? That's kind of what that's doing. But in that case, it's not quite an idea of reference because you're probably reading it somewhere, you're probably interpreting it based on some astrology, and so you're not just making it up out of whole cloth. And so that's not quite the same thing as somebody who believes in these things in addition to, I dropped my pen, this is what the thunderstorm means, and some of the rest of the stuff we're going to talk about here. So these folks will tend to have odd beliefs just generally, and sometimes these will be very specific to them. And then magical thinking in particular means that when you think that something can happen without understanding how it could happen. That is to say, usually when we talk about magical thinking, it's like little kids do this, right? I'm going to be rich and famous and make $800 million and live on the Mars, right? and they say stuff like this, and you say, well, how are you gonna get there, buddy? And he's like, I don't know, I'm just gonna be rich. That's magical thinking, right? That's just this idea, I'm just gonna skip the steps, it doesn't matter how I'm gonna get there, but it is gonna happen, right? And so you'll see folks, in addition to their odd beliefs, just make assertions. I'm gonna have a good day, look at the thunderstorm, right? That's kind of magical thinking. Well, how are you gonna have a good day? I don't know, but look at the thunderstorm. That doesn't quite add up. Again, we do this type of thing all the time, but again, it's just another piece of this puzzle. Number 3, unusual perceptual experiences, including bodily illusions. So this is going to be a bit close to sort of a light, we're talking about light delusions. This will be sort of like a light hallucination. This isn't going to be like I see a thing that's flying over the sky. This is more like I see your aura, man, and it is way green today. What's up, right? This is sort of like a slight perceptual experience, something that that isn't really there. And in fact, it's my understanding that if you ask these people, do you really see a green outline around my body? They will say, no, I just mean like the thing that I'm sensing about your aura is this color, right? Whatever that means. And so they can kind of dissociate the idea or kind of tease apart this idea that they're not really seeing it, but I'm sensing it in a way that makes it seem like this color. I know that's hard to follow, but those folks would be able to say, no, it's not really there. It's like when you have an imaginary friend. That's a great example. And in fact, the client I'm thinking of who I worked with had an imaginary friend, even as a college student. So, and you ask the person, you know that person's not really there yet. And I know you're talking to them and concerned for their welfare, but you know they're not real, right? And the person would say, yeah, they're an imaginary friend. I know they're not real, but don't sit on him. You know, and so it's that ability to kind of hold both of these things in the same breath. And so that's that kind of unusual perceptual experience that they're talking about, or bodily illusion. So if it's related to yourself, you're like, I don't know, my hand feels like it's tingling, and that might mean X, Y, or Z. So these are the type of things that we're talking about. Number 4, odd thinking in speech, such as vague, circumstantial, metaphorical, over-elaborate, or stereotyped. This is like a person who starts to teach a class in a British accent because they think it's more charming and funny, right? This is the type of thing that a person might do if they've got this type of personalities. You might see that they will sometimes speak in a way that isn't really how they speak. They might speak in a way that's sort of stereotyped. To stereotype means kind of like on the nose, or stereotype to the thing that they're doing, right? So professors speak in British accent, so I will speak in a British accent until I don't. And it's not something that you'll see that they'll try to maintain. It's not necessarily something they're doing to be showy. Often you'll just watch them kind of change into that and then go back, and you're like, did you just have an accent? I don't know, sometimes, right? And then they'll go back and not really think anything of it. And so you'll see that these folks will tend to kind of think and behave in ways that seem a little theatrical sometimes, that seem a little over the top sometimes. And again, this is a piece just of how the disorder seems to play out. You'll see a lot more of this when we get to cluster B and the histrionic personality, who's all about theatricality. But these folks kind of do it. I'm not sure why they do it. We understand in some ways why the histrionic person's doing it, but for this person, I don't know if it's just they're slipping into that way of thinking or what it is, but you will also see them do it. You'll see a few examples of it, I think, in the videos I'll show you. Number 5, suspiciousness or paranoid ideation. Of course, they are in the same cluster. Of course, when you think about that idea of psychosis or psychosis light or schizophrenia light or whatever we're going to call that, those things can be related. Of course, that idea of magical thinking, ideas of reference, we're already talking about that in the paranoid personality, but they're very specific about how they use those ideas of reference. The schizotypal is using it in a broader way, often with relation to a lot of things that they come in contact with and encounter. And so they may also use it in the same way that the paranoid person is using it, right? To say, well, what did you mean by that? And I don't think that person likes me. They keep looking over my shoulder. You know, doesn't necessarily make any sense, but they may glean this kind of negativity from their idea of reference, in addition to any positivity or neutrality that they're going to glean from it. So we would expect to see the schizotypal personality also show occasionally some of that paranoia, some of that sense of, well, maybe you mean something meaner than you're saying. Number 7, behavior or appearance that is odd, eccentric, or peculiar. This was the case, I would say, for the client that I worked with, and I think you'll be able to see this in some of the examples. I mean, you'll see it. They tend to sort of just be a little unkempt. They tend to not necessarily be checking in with themselves about things such as being tidy, et cetera, as much as we kind of think to do in sort of a modern Western culture. And sometimes it's not that they're dirty, it's just that they don't care to brush their hair, or they don't, care if their clothes match or whatever, right? So they'll just have this kind of way of being that maybe is a little strange. For us, number 8, finally we get this way down here, which again for me suggests that it's really more of a byproduct, and that is to say a lack of close friends or confidants other than first-degree relatives. So it's way down here. Again, if you're thinking about these things statistically, this would suggest that it's on kind of the lower end of the list. Again, which for me kind of confirms this idea that it's not that they don't want friends, and it isn't saying that they don't want them here. It kind of hints at that at the opening paragraph, but it's just saying that they lack them. I think that's more appropriate. I think the fact that they may lack those close friends and relationships because they're having a hard time getting into them is different than saying, I don't want a close friend or relationship. So that's number 8, lacking close friends or relationships or confidants other than first-degree relatives. And then number 9, which helps us differentiate it from, again, paranoid and also schizoid, is excessive social anxiety that does not diminish with familiarity and tends to be associated with paranoid fears rather than negative judgments about the self. So they're experiencing perhaps that paranoia that we're talking about, but whereas the paranoid personality tends to want to fight through that, I'll show you, you think I'm no good, or I see what you're doing, I'm going to do that to you first, right? That's how we tend to characterize the paranoid. The schizotypal is really maybe seeing some of those same things and making it more of a socially anxious experience. It is to say, oh, I don't think they really like me. Maybe I shouldn't go, right? That's kind of the difference between how they're going to experience and play through that paranoia. Not to say that one can't do the other and the other can't do both, etc. But we'll tend to see that it looks a little more anxious for the schizotypal than it does for the paranoid, who's going to make it look a little more angry. There's one more thing. And I was just going to say that I can confirm this with the client that I was working with. We worked together for several weeks, and it felt like every time he showed up, it was the first time initially. So it always felt like the first 20 minutes, he kind of didn't trust me, and he had to make sure that, not literally, but had to make sure I was the same person that was kind of nice to him last time, right? And so there was always this sort of stepping up that with other clients, it's like, hey doc, how you doing? Let me tell you about my week, right? There's not this kind of, I need to get to know you again and make sure that this is still a safe place that you wouldn't expect to see with most folks. Now you might see that with trauma, or you might see that with some other conditions, but generally, right, that's going to be short-lived. Generally, even that you can kind of work through, even with somebody with trauma, once they've begun to trust you. I had always really felt like every time this person came in that there was always this like, okay, well, this is what's going on, and then by the last few minutes, it felt like, he'd met me before. So, all right, that's it for cluster A. I rushed through it a bit, but I think most of the content, most of the stuff that you're gonna need to know is gonna be in those videos, just in terms of looking and seeing what that looks like, because Really all I can do in here is maybe tell you a couple stories and read the diagnostic criteria, but again, the words on the page for me don't necessarily convey what it's like to see me interact, treat, think about some of these different disorders. So I want you to take a look, make sure you do take a look at those things. Don't just look at this lecture and think you got what you need. Make sure you look at some of these videos, at least one example from each of these disorders, and then I think you'll be prepared for anything that's going to come up on the exam or other papers that you have to do. And then next week we'll start looking at cluster B. That will probably have to happen in 2 parts. I'm a little more long-winded about that cluster, and there's a lot more to talk about and a lot more to show you, so just be prepared that that may actually be split over 2 different videos. But otherwise, have a good weekend, and I'll see you soon.